Welcome. I'm really happy to have everyone here. Before I start talking about a few technical things, I want to ask people here a question. Would you be happy paying 1 cent a day to have Google searches, Google email, everything, utterly privately? No ads, no cookies, no selling your information. Do you know how much profit Google would be worth doing that? Actually, probably 40 times their company value now for that 1 cent. They're very inefficient. Ads suck. The hit rate is horrible. Google do 63,000 approximately searches per day. That can be put in payment channels. By February, we'll be able to actually handle that volume and allow people to pay for things. Right now, you won't pay for Bitcoin SV every time you do it because credit cards cost too much and they'll cost you 30 cents. So what you'd probably do is bundle up, say, 6 months worth of all your expenses for all your email, all your searches, all your twetches, all your everything else, and pay maybe $3. Much better, in my opinion. And you know what? People talk about securing wallets and things like that on browsers. Do you think hackers are going to break into hundreds of machines to steal $1 per machine? Probably not. You want to know the odd thing here too? It's actually more secure than most Gmail accounts are right now. You can actually have thresholds, have the ability to back up and everything like that. And right now, that $1 can be secured more than the average person secures their credit card. I don't know about you, but I worry about my credit card more than I worry about a pound. So let's get on and talk about some of the things we're doing. So everyone likes to tell you hash puzzles are insecure, you can't do X, Y, and Z. Well, you can. I'm sorry. We can actually use cryptography in different ways. Just because people tell us this is how it's meant to work, not an issue. In ECDSA, we have basically a K value, which is an ephemeral key. We can use it to actually do calculations and other such things. And if we're smart, because we're not reusing our keys, it doesn't matter. None of the Sony attacks or anything like that where people had their keys compromised will matter because you don't ever reuse the key. And we're not going to run out anytime soon because there's 2 to the 256, give or take, of these with a few that we chuck out because of security concerns. And we should run out, if everyone's using this, say, 1 billion times a second, sometime within 100 trillion years. So we probably don't need to worry anytime soon. So what are we also looking at this? We're looking at basically allowing someone to create a puzzle that is solved with a different form of signature. So in a normal signature, you have an RS pair, R being the sort of ephemeral key by the curve multiplier, S being the actual signature value. But if we throw the signature algorithm on its head and now don't care about the actual key the normal way, we can actually have a completely different algorithm using the existing technology that allows us to do things like hash puzzles, to have secure algorithms, to have one-time passwords, to have access codes, to have all sorts of things you can imagine, allowing us to do things such as zero knowledge proofs, proving someone's calculated something, sharing a value without actually telling everyone in the room, provably setting a commitment. So I can say, I will bid this much on an auction, and if that value comes up, you win. Lottos, all sorts of things. So we can start doing different types of script. And this is one of the problems that happened in the early days of Bitcoin. Everyone ran around going, transactions will be too big, they'll be too complex. And effectively, most of the script operands were turned off, really crippling what Bitcoin was. Because back in the day, Eric Voorhees argued with me, saying that Bitcoin should only be for money, because whatever. No real reason, it's just because. And not thinking, what about all these other things we can do? If you think about the value of a blockchain, it's an economic security model. And if we start now having you run your email, your Gmail, your Google searches, your whatever you want to save, your OneDrive, everything like that, that's more use. More use, more value, more security. And it's not because everyone runs a node. Really, who cares? What you care about is you've got a whole lot of companies, and it's all about normal corporate greed. Miners make money by winning and getting a block to every other miner first. Not discovering a block first, by ensuring every other miner gets a valid block first. That's an important distinction. Because if you don't have a valid block, you don't win. And it's a zero-sum game. The number of blocks per period of time are set, which means if you can actually find an invalid block that another miner did, you increase your earnings. So miners are incentivized to actually look through all of the blocks and kill off any other blocks that are bad from other miners. And they're all competing. So it's very simple, it's game theoretic. It's a normal everyday game theoretic model where we want to beat the other guy to make more money. And who here thinks corporations don't want to make more money? No one? Basically, that's it. So, to maintain all of this, we need to have signatures. We don't keep doing it. We can do all sorts of signature hashing. People don't seem to understand, but there are sig hash none, sig hash all, sig hash single, etc. So we can actually sign only single inputs and outputs. We can sign multiple inputs, multiple outputs, combinations. We can actually rejoin those, build transactions that you can join one to another. And this is another aspect that everyone forgets out of Bitcoin. It's peer-to-peer. That does not mean peer to node to mesh to node to user. It means Alice to Bob, then it gets settled. I can hand a transaction to you. When I built Bitcoin, it was initially IP to IP. And everyone ran around going, that's not secure. Well, in alpha code, because you haven't added SLS, TLS, etc., you haven't added anything to verify, so what? You don't turn something off, you fix it. Of course, that's not what happened. But we can actually start building all these things. Now, I'd like you to think, if I can securely, with monetization without advertising built in, eventually my aim is to have transactions for under 1,000th of a cent. If I can profitably sell something for 1,000th of a cent and do volume, what sort of things can you do? Not what sort of things can I think up, because the real challenge is finding other people to think up other things. A Facebook without advertising, without selling your info to the NSA. That would be nice, wouldn't it? I mean, not all of us are Americans who want to give over our information freely to the NSA. So we want to do things like general knowledge questions, maybe paid Quora, maybe one of these pub things where people can have a national challenge and call out the values, and someone can win a thing and a prize can be guaranteed and no one needs to worry, and it can all happen and people can have global challenges. Games online, chess, whatever else. We can also use it to delegate authorities. So Authorization. So what about contracts? What about things like EDI, logistics? All these big things that people spend lots of money on and don't do very well. The average cost right at the moment for EDI, electronic data transactions, is something like between $3 and $4 per transaction. It's horrendous. When you think about it, it is absolutely horrendous. When you talk about some of the shipping labels and whatever else, they can cost over $100. Right now, Walmart spends $500 million a year on this. It's absolutely ridiculous when you consider this. The American Pentagon spends close to $1 billion. Probably also has a few hammers in there for $10,000 each, but that's normal American stuff. So we can also, if we're not worrying about the size of transactions anymore, when we're paying small amounts and we pay as we use, start putting these things together. What if we have multiple puzzles? We can start coding. If you discover puzzle A, something happens. Else, puzzle B, something happens. Else if, something else happens. If you do A and B, what happens? For old farts like me who used to code back in the old days, everything was nice and simple. Games were fairly much that. I mean, I think Mario was a 5K game. I think the image for Super Mario, when you display it on Twitter now, is actually something like 100 times the size of the entire game code, which is a little bit ridiculous, but obviously that's the modern world we live in. We want high resolution of a low resolution thing. So we want to be able to start thinking how we might do these things, including forwarding. Imagine that we can now ensure that all our Google payments are going to be secure because we don't want to lose or be ripped off and, well, maybe lose a whole 1/10 of a cent. I know, terrible. We can make that completely secure for tokens and everything like this. We can have transferable tokens. We can pay for our Oyster cards now much cheaper. Not 15 cents or something going to a processor every time. If we're paying 15 cents less because our fees are now 1/10 of a cent or less, shouldn't our train tickets be cheaper? And our bus ticket? I mean, do we really want Visa making 15 cents or the banks making 15 cents every time we have a train ticket? Exactly. So that's the sort of things people need to think about. All these horribly inefficient payment systems, horribly insecure payment systems. Visa card, right now, horribly insecure. People take Visa cards every day. Imagine, on the other hand, if you had a little app that read the blockchain and linked to your card and the payment system, and a transaction goes through and you see it on your phone now, and you get to say, no, I didn't make that, or yes, I did. Because obviously if you're in a restaurant or something like that, you're going to self-authorize. Instead of a PIN, it could actually go to your phone. You don't need as much, none of this 30% APR BS, because the risk won't be there. If no one's going to be able to steal your card, they can't take your money, then there's no way to justify charging 30% for a credit card anymore. So what is Metanet? In effect, what we're trying to do is have a replacement for the shit show, and the only way to put it is a shit show that is the internet today. The internet, no one could figure out, how do we monetize the internet? Credit cards cost too much, PayPal costs too much, everything costs too much, so we'll just put advertising on everything. And advertising is horribly inefficient, invades our privacy, means they sell everything about us, anything we look at. It's horrible, and we don't get the money for it. We get the right to use Google. Yippee. What we want to be able to do is we want to include tokens to have access, to have low-cost fees, to enable us to start choosing what we want to pay for, when we want to pay for it. If we don't like a service, we now know what we're paying for. And the reality is, everything should be way cheaper. The price we actually pay for Google is 100 times what it should be. Literally. Because we are selling our information. Every time, in the 1990s, it was first put down that the SEC worked out these people selling emails and whatever else where you registered. It was $17 every time you put an email address in someone's server. That's $17 you're not getting that a marketing company will make from you. That's a lot more than I'm talking about when we're talking micropayments. There won't be that anymore. If you want to sell access, you can. That doesn't mean the way that everyone's talked about in the past by putting your email in and hoping to get a better ad thing and 30% off. It means actually selling your information. If you want to do that and someone's contacting you, rather than Google getting ad money, let the advertiser pay you to read their slogan. Why should Google get that money? Why don't you get 15 cents? Instead of clicking through and Google getting something, maybe Google can serve you up better ads that you want to read. And they can take a small amount of money for finding ones you want to read. And then you get the ones you want. It's a different model. And when we're not selling clicks, when we're not selling people going through and having likes, when we're not basically trying to get as many people re-clicking things on Twitter, the model now changes. When there's an immutable record of the sort of things people are undermining society with, then Twitter doesn't become a place where child pornographers try and get other child pornographers involved. It doesn't become a place where terrorists become better at being terrorists. You know, this is one that people love. Twitter is the biggest cause of terrorism funding in the world now. You want to know why? Because they have redesigned how terrorism works. 10 years ago, 20 years ago, things were different. 20 years ago, you would get videos with someone being decapitated. All these things that shocked everyone, got onto the worldwide news. You don't get that on Twitter anymore. You don't get that really out there anymore. Because people have been aligned to be slowly indoctrinated. Terrorism now is all about teaching people the same way Scientologists teach people. Slowly indoctrinating them, building them in, getting them to have groups that like them. Sometimes groups of thousands of people who will say things about how great you are, which are maybe run by 3 people in a farm, that click and, wow, that's great, you should come here and talk with more. And they slowly indoctrinate you. And how does this work? Because it's an ad-based model, and it's a model not based on anything in reality. So what we want to be able to do is start actually monetizing access. I've got a theory. Everything bad really comes down to something in economics. If we look at crime, it's economic in nature. If we look at all the money that people pay to do bad things, it's economic in nature. We saw the largest child porn network ever taken down just yesterday. A few hundred people now in jail, lots of other things happening. It's all about money. People smuggling, it's about money. Terrorism is about money. It's not about religion. It's not about anything else. All these things are about money. The guy who blows himself up, he's not the one. The guy at the top makes money. And this is the thing people don't talk about. Because we can't trace it. It's really hard on Swift. Swift is a shitty network. It's maybe 40 years old in the current form. It has logs that get lost. It aggregates once a day. Horrible. Imagine we take logging to a different level. Imagine a world where, in a blockchain based on the internet, every time you log into a server, it's immutably recorded forever. Can never go. I used to work doing pen tests and everything like that. I ran security companies, and the first thing you'll learn any attacker does anytime is delete evidence, delete logs. They'll get rid of how they got onto the system, because if you can find out they got onto the system, you will get rid of them. They will sit there for 6 months sometimes, then do an attack. But if you find them, if you know that they're there, you get rid of them early. If you get alerted when someone logs into your server when they're not meant to, and something pops up on your phone, you can take action. When you know that money is being transferred from the wrong sources to the wrong people, authorities can take action. This is why we need payment mechanisms, why we need an internet based on money. One, I'm not going to tell you it costs more. I'm actually going to say it's cheaper. And that's the irony of all this. It's a model that costs a fraction of what we pay now. Unless you're an advertising person, and I'm sorry. So we want to create things like browser wallets that build all of this in. And we can do it fairly securely right now, but we're not talking large amounts of money. If we're doing micropayments and paying for emails and paying for web access and paying for messaging, then who's going to really care to harvest your 20 cents that you've got on your browser? If you have to try and actively break into 1 billion machines to, well, hopefully make a little bit of money and leave logs as you're doing it, you're probably not going to put so much effort in. Not many people spend days and days trying to get into a machine to steal 20 cents. Don't know about you, but it doesn't seem to, not really my idea of a good time. So, deterministic keys. We also want to be able to structure things so that we can start working out indexes. And where people go wrong is they need to treat Bitcoin as plumbing. We have access graphs, graph databases, we have access tables right now based on hashes. All of these things, when we're looking at Cassandra and other such databases, work on hashes. This is how Bitcoin works. We do not need to have users knowing those numbers. At the end of the day, this whole idea of know your keys, know what they are, is wrong. You don't need to know all that information. As a user, you shouldn't ever need to know all that information. You should log in as you and not care about the thousands of little numbers that are out there, because who cares? You don't want to keep having lots of big addresses. You want to have lots of little ones. So we want to be able to calculate addresses, calculate hierarchies of those so that we can map them. And it's also then private, because if we have different addresses for everything we're doing, no one's going to know what the hell we're doing. That simple. This really comes down to, if we want to scale, it has to be a peer process. Things like Ethereum get it completely backwards. You don't run everything on every machine. You allow users to be users. And you allow peer processes to be peer processes. That means you and I exchange. And we settle the process on the blockchain. And if there's two of us, and we've made an agreement, and that might have gone back and forth 50 times or whatever else, we don't need to necessarily tell the world everything we've ever done. Just what we've agreed. If we're doing an auction process, we don't need to sit there and go, well, I bid 100, he bid 105. Then we did this, and here's our whole recording. We can do that if we want, but we don't have to. We don't have to do everything we need to do. All the communications can be aggregated and saved. allowing us to remember that we can also put the cost of transmitting packets where it's best. I don't need to worry about my change. The way Bitcoin and transactions work, I don't need to check because it's very simple. I hand you a transaction, it is signed with the change in it. There are two options now. One, you, the merchant, can send it off and take my money, and the only way you can take my money is by giving me back my change. Two, you can treat it like a check and tear it up, and I don't get any change. In the same way is if I give a merchant a check and he rips it up, I don't get any change. He doesn't get any money. I don't know about you, I don't really see that as a problem. I don't need to know why I need to verify anything in this. I've got a choice. Well, the merchant does anyway. The merchant can take my money and give me back the correct change, or give me a freebie. And if he gives me a freebie, I'm not going to jump up and down and complain. That simple. So, how do we do wallet design? Although that's cut off at the end, but we want to actually involve people communicating, saying where our transaction is, making it easy, having it as a peer process. I just tell you, this is my transaction. How do I make it so you don't need to look up my input transaction? I save it and I hand it to you. And people say, what if you lose that? What if I lose my keys? What if I lose my other stuff? What if I lose my login? If I save it all in one file, it's one database on my computer. If I lose it either way. If I lose my key, which is in the same file, I've lost the input. If I've lost my input, it's in the same file, I've lost my key. It doesn't matter. There's no difference. You're just as secure, just as resilient either way. You don't need to sort of go into these nth degrees of insanity thinking about what ifs, because if you lose your keys, you've lost your keys. Hopefully you have a backup. That's the whole point. Back it up. And if it's small amounts, you're not going to care anyway. Oh damn, I've wrecked a machine and I've lost 1/10 of a cent. Bugger. Even then, I could have end lock time transaction, and at the end of the month, my 1/10 of a cent comes back. Yippee, I'm rich. So, we want to make sure it's low bandwidth. How do we do that? Instead of sending everything, all the communications out to the blockchain all the time, we use a peer process. I hand something to my peer. So, all of these things, simplified payment verification, low bandwidth, etc., were originally part of the design of Bitcoin. They're part of what was actually built there. They're how it works, how it's designed to scale, how it's designed to be peer. But unfortunately, people have got different ideas of what they consider Bitcoin. They want to see something like e-gold. They want to see it so people communicate without records. So this whole nature of records came crashing down because people wanted Silk Road. People wanted to do naughty things. Well, I'm sorry, blockchain's not really good for that. Blockchain records these things. It's private, it's not anonymous, and it allows people to actually communicate in the real world. It allows you, effectively, to have a system that does payments anywhere, allows you to have really low-cost transactions, and allows you to create all sorts of new products. And when we're starting to talk about all this with inputs, outputs, it doesn't need to be just money. It can be tokens, it can be dollars, it can be game tokens, it can be return values on computer code. If you think about how ASM, assembly language, works, we can use this as our pointers in a new system. We can have data linked that people call and people pay for, that they then basically send to each other as a peer, that gets put on the blockchain where we exchange the paths, we create a transaction, and that transaction can be anything. it can allow us not only money, but it could be that Google search we wanted to pay for. It could be that latest picture of the Kardashians that I haven't actually seen one in ages, but I'm sure there's some out there that my daughter keeps doing this sort of shit, so I'm old. And we can buy and sell all this stuff, allowing us effectively to have a scalable system. So why do we want to do it? Well, customer, easy. Merchant, fast, secure. Network, quick. And at the end of the day, it's not even just money. It's anything you can think about. An internet not selling your life. An internet not tracking everything you do. One that you choose what you want to pay for and you know the cost of. Thank you.